My name is Elena Rodriguez. I'm 34 years old, and I've been dreading this family reunion for weeks. My siblings have always had a talent for making me feel invisible. Their polite smiles masking subtle criticisms about my unconventional choices. What they don't know is that the little tech startup I've been working on just received a buyout offer that would change everything. I've chosen to drive my reliable but aging Honda and live in a modest apartment because flashy displays never appealed to me. Their perception of my worth is about to shift dramatically today, and the private jet waiting at the airfield is just the beginning of their education. Before I tell you how this all unfolded, I'd love to know where you're following this story from. Drop a comment with your location, and if you've ever felt underestimated by the people closest to you, hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories of triumph. Trust me, what happens next will completely redefine everything my family thought they knew about success. Growing up in the shadow of my older brother Marcus and younger sister Isabella in our hometown of Millbrook Valley was like living in a constant comparison game. Marcus, now 38, had always been the golden child who embodied every parental dream. He followed the predetermined path through Stanford to a corner office at Goldman Sachs, complete with a Manhattan penthouse and a summer house in Martha's Vineyard that he loved to mention at every family gathering. His success story was the template everyone expected the rest of us to follow. Isabella, 30, took a different but equally impressive route by marrying Sebastian, whose family owned a chain of luxury hotels across the East Coast. Her fairy tale wedding was featured in Town and Country magazine, and her life of charity fundraisers and exclusive social events fulfilled our parents' vision of refined success. She moved effortlessly through high society, her Instagram feed a carefully curated display of designer gowns and exotic vacation destinations. Then there was me, Elena, the middle child who never quite fit the mold. Where Marcus was strategically ambitious and Isabella was socially brilliant, I was always questioning conventions and searching for something more meaningful. My parents tried to love us equally, but it became obvious early that my siblings and I operated from completely different value systems. During high school, while Marcus was class valedictorian and Isabella was prom queen, I was quietly building my first website for a local nonprofit, teaching myself coding late into the night. My parents viewed my technical interests as a phase that would eventually give way to a sensible career in law or medicine. When I announced my intention to skip graduate school and launch a tech company, the family reaction ranged from gentle disappointment to outright intervention attempts. "You're throwing away your potential, Elena," my father had said during that devastating dinner conversation 8 years ago, his voice heavy with resignation. "Your grades could get you into any graduate program. Why waste that on some computer hobby that might not even exist in 5 years?" 8 years ago, I left Millbrook Valley with $3,000 in savings and an unshakable belief that I could build something meaningful. My family predicted I'd return within a year, humbled and ready to accept their version of a stable future. When I didn't come crawling back, they constructed their own narrative about my life, that I was struggling financially but too proud to admit failure, that my business ventures were failing, that I was living paycheck to paycheck in some cramped studio apartment. The reality was far different. My journey had been challenging, marked by 2 near bankruptcies and countless 18-hour workdays fueled by coffee and determination. But my cybersecurity platform, SecureVault, had gradually gained traction among small businesses, desperate for affordable data protection. 3 years of living on ramen noodles and sleeping on an air mattress in my office eventually led to a company valued at over $40 million. 4 months ago, Tech Global Corporation made an acquisition offer that would make me wealthier than I'd ever imagined possible. Yet I told none of this to my family. During our quarterly phone calls and rare visits home, I listened to their assumptions about my struggling startup life without correction. When Marcus offered to pay for my health insurance, or when Isabella suggested I apply for a marketing position at one of Sebastian's hotels, I simply thanked them and changed the subject. It was easier than explaining why I chose to live modestly despite my newfound wealth, why I valued impact over image, why I was quietly funding educational programs for underprivileged kids rather than buying luxury cars. The truth was too complex for their binary understanding of success and failure. The call that summoned me home came 3 weeks ago. Mom had suffered a stroke, and Dad's early onset Parkinson's was progressing more rapidly than expected. They needed specialized care that stretched beyond their retirement savings. Marcus had organized a family meeting to discuss care options and financial responsibilities, his tone carrying the familiar undertone of doubt when he asked if I could manage to contribute whatever small amount I could afford. Now, as my commercial flight descended toward the regional airport serving Millbrook Valley, familiar anxiety twisted in my stomach. For years, I'd maintained emotional distance from their judgment, building a life surrounded by people who valued innovation and character over traditional status markers. But family has a unique ability to reduce even the most accomplished adult back to their childhood insecurities and roles. Would this visit finally be the moment I revealed the truth about my success? Or would I continue protecting myself from their inevitable shock, the awkward recalibration of our relationships, the questions about why I'd maintained this deception for so long? As the plane touched down on the familiar runway, I was still undecided. My parents needed help, and I'd already quietly arranged for the best possible care through channels they knew nothing about. But my siblings had no idea what I was capable of contributing, and tomorrow's family meeting promised to be another exercise in their well-meaning but patronizing concern for my financial limitations. I tightened my grip on my deliberately unremarkable backpack as I prepared to step back into the complicated web of family expectations and misunderstandings that had shaped our relationships for far too long. The morning of my departure, I stood in my downtown loft's walk-in closet, deliberately selecting the most unremarkable clothes I owned. I chose worn jeans with a small tear at the knee, a faded university sweatshirt from a school I'd never attended, and scuffed sneakers that had seen better days. My executive assistant Carmen watched with barely concealed bewilderment as I packed similarly modest outfits into an old canvas duffel bag instead of my usual leather luggage set. "You're worth $40 million, and you're dressing like you're heading to a college reunion," she observed, holding my usual travel itinerary in its monogrammed folder. "And you're taking a commercial flight instead of the company jet because this is exactly how they expect me to arrive," I replied, pulling my hair into a simple ponytail and deliberately leaving my expensive jewelry in its case. "They have a very specific image of who I am, and I'm not quite ready to shatter that illusion yet." The flight to Millbrook Valley gave me 2 hours to reflect on why I maintained this elaborate deception. The truth was layered and complicated. Part of me genuinely enjoyed the freedom that came with being underestimated. In business negotiations, I'd learned that people who dismissed me often revealed more than they intended, giving me strategic advantages they never saw coming. With my family, their low expectations meant I never had to justify my unconventional choices or defend my success according to their rigid metrics. But there was a deeper, more painful reason that I rarely admitted even to myself. Their dismissal had wounded me more profoundly than I could acknowledge at the time. When I first left home to pursue entrepreneurship, each patronizing comment about my phase of idealism and every suggestion that I should settle down and get serious like your siblings had accumulated into layers of protective armor around my authentic self. "Your problem, Elena, is that you've always been impractical," Marcus had declared during our last family Christmas 3 years ago. "Some people are natural leaders who build empires. Others are meant to support those visions. There's no shame in knowing your limitations." That night, I'd stepped onto my parents' back porch to hide my tears, pretending to take an urgent business call while I composed myself. The bitter irony was that earlier that same day, I'd signed a contract that would take Secure Vault International, expanding our client base by 300%. My team had celebrated with champagne in our conference room while I prepared to fly home and be treated like the family's cautionary tale. The taxi from Millbrook Regional Airport wound through streets that looked frozen in time. Downtown hadn't changed much. The same antique bookstore where I'd spent countless afternoons, the coffee shop where I'd written my first business plan, the community center where I'd first noticed how vulnerable small businesses were to cyber threats. Everything seemed smaller now, preserved like a snow globe, while my world had expanded beyond recognition. When we pulled up to my childhood home, I felt that familiar mix of nostalgia and apprehension wash over me. The craftsman-style house with its wraparound porch and climbing roses looked exactly the same, down to the swing Dad had hung from the oak tree when I was 7. For a moment, I was 10 years old again, running up those steps with a school project or art piece, desperately seeking approval that always seemed just slightly out of reach. I paid the driver and took a steadying breath before walking up the familiar flagstone path. Before I could ring the doorbell, the front door swung open to reveal Marcus in pressed khakis and a polo shirt that probably cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget, even though he was supposedly having a casual weekend at home. "There she is," he said by way of greeting, checking his Rolex. "We expected you hours ago. Did your flight get delayed, or did you have to take the Greyhound?" His eyes swept over my deliberately casual appearance, and I caught the small, satisfied smile that suggested my appearance confirmed every assumption he'd made about my financial situation. "Good to see you too, Marcus," I replied, accepting his brief, stiff hug. "Flight was fine. How are Mom and Dad?" "Hanging in there, considering everything," he said, reaching for my duffel bag. His expression mixed pity with superiority as he noted its worn condition. "I've been here since Thursday, getting everything organized for tomorrow's meeting. Isabella and Sebastian will arrive this evening. You're in your old room, naturally. Nothing's changed up there." As he led me inside, he continued without pause. "Listen, if you need help with expenses while you're here, hotel costs, meals, whatever, just let me know. I know taking time off work must be financially challenging for someone in your position." There it was, the first of what would undoubtedly be many gentle reminders of my perceived economic status. I could have corrected him immediately, mentioned that my schedule was being managed by a team of executives, or that money was the least of my concerns. Instead, I simply nodded and thanked him politely, slipping back into the role they'd assigned me in our family's ongoing drama. Dad was in his favorite recliner in the den, noticeably thinner than during my last visit, his hands showing the slight tremor that had worsened over the past year. Mom was in the kitchen despite her recent stroke, moving carefully but determinedly as she prepared what looked like enough food for a small army. "Elena, sweetheart," she exclaimed, reaching for a hug. "You look..." She paused, clearly searching for something positive to say about my deliberately downplayed appearance. "Healthy. Are you eating enough on your budget? You know you can always call if you need help with groceries or anything else." "I'm fine, Mom," I assured her, helping her into a chair. "Tell me about your recovery. What did the doctors say about your progress?" As we discussed her physical therapy and medication adjustments, I could feel Marcus hovering nearby, interjecting with medical terminology and treatment options he'd clearly researched extensively. He'd already created a comprehensive binder of care facilities and in-home nursing services, complete with cost analyses and quality ratings. His organization was impressive, but it came with an underlying assumption that he would be making all major decisions with minimal input from me, the struggling middle child who could barely contribute financially to any meaningful solution. "We'll go through everything in detail tomorrow morning," he said, closing the thick binder with authority. "But I wanted you to have time tonight to process the realities of the situation. Quality care isn't cheap, Elena, and we need to be realistic about what everyone can contribute." His emphasis on cost was deliberate, a subtle reminder of what he perceived as my limited ability to help. I nodded thoughtfully, knowing that my investment portfolio already contained more than enough to provide my parents with the finest care available, with plenty remaining for their comfort and dignity. But tonight wasn't the time for revelations. I needed to fully understand the depth of my siblings' assumptions before deciding how to proceed with the truth. That evening, Mom insisted on preparing a family dinner, despite her limited mobility following the stroke. I offered to cook instead, but Marcus had already arranged for catering from Millbrook's most expensive restaurant, his way of ensuring the meal would be quote, appropriate for Isabella and Sebastian's refined tastes. The gesture also served as another subtle reminder that whatever I might have contributed would have been inadequate. The spread was undeniably impressive. Herb-crusted salmon, truffle risotto, organic vegetables, and artisanal bread that Mom kept marveling over. "This must have cost a fortune," she said, carefully arranging the elegant containers on her best serving platters. "Marcus, you're always so thoughtful." "It's nothing, Mom," he replied with practiced humility. "The bonus from the Morrison deal came through last month. Besides, we should make the most of these family gatherings while we still can." The doorbell chimed just as we were setting the dining room table with Mom's cherished china. Isabella swept in like she was making a red carpet entrance, her husband Sebastian trailing behind carrying multiple shopping bags from high-end boutiques. My sister looked like she'd stepped directly from a fashion magazine in her silk blouse and designer jeans, her dark hair perfectly styled, despite supposedly rushing from their 3-hour drive. "We're finally here," she announced, embracing our mother with practiced care to avoid disturbing her recovery. "And we brought presents for everyone." She proceeded to distribute packages with theatrical flair: aged whiskey for Dad, a cashmere wrap for Mom, and an expensive leather briefcase for Marcus. When she reached me, her radiant smile flickered slightly before becoming overly bright. "And for you, Elena, I found something perfect," she said, handing me a smaller bag containing a gift card to a chain department store. "I noticed during your last visit that your wardrobe could use some updating. This should help you get a few professional pieces for networking events or job interviews." "Thank you," I said evenly, pocketing the card while ignoring the implication that I needed assistance finding proper employment. "How considerate." "Well, we all want to see you flourish," she replied with a patronizing squeeze of my shoulder. Speaking of flourishing, Sebastian just closed the deal on that resort property in Napa Valley. We're celebrating by completely renovating our kitchen, Italian marble countertops throughout. Dinner conversation revolved entirely around my siblings' achievements. Marcus's recent promotion to senior vice president, Isabella's charity auction that had raised 6 figures for children's cancer research, Sebastian's golf tournament victory at their exclusive country club. When attention occasionally turned to me, it was always framed as gentle concern, wrapped in barely concealed pity. "What about you, Elena?" Isabella asked, while refilling her wine glass with a vintage that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "Any exciting developments in your... What is it you do again? Something with computers?" "Software development," I replied vaguely, helping myself to more risotto. "Small business solutions, mostly freelance work." "Still doing the gig economy thing," Marcus interjected with barely hidden disapproval. "I know several colleagues who might need basic websites or data entry. Nothing major, but it could provide more reliable income than project-based work." "I appreciate that," I said, swallowing both my pride and the urge to mention that my gig work had recently been valued at $40 million by one of the world's largest tech corporations. Dad, who had been unusually quiet during dinner, suddenly focused on me with the clarity that sometimes emerged despite his condition. "Are you still in that cramped apartment with the thin walls? The one where you could hear your neighbors arguing?" That apartment had been 4 years and 2 residences ago. I now owned a penthouse overlooking Central Park, but they didn't need to know that yet. "I have a comfortable place," I answered truthfully. "Comfortable is relative." Isabella laughed, exchanging a knowing look with Sebastian. "Remember when Elena thought success meant being able to afford name-brand pasta instead of generic? Some priorities never change." As everyone chuckled at my supposed simplicity, the conversation inevitably shifted to tomorrow's primary purpose: our parents' care needs. Marcus slipped into his corporate presentation mode, complete with subtle hand gestures and strategic pauses. "The reality is," he began, "Mom and Dad need more comprehensive support than Medicare will provide. Their retirement savings are substantial, but not unlimited, especially considering the level of care they deserve after everything they've given us. We've been researching several excellent options," Isabella added smoothly. "There's a wonderful continuing care community near our home in Connecticut. Very exclusive. We know the director personally. The medical facilities are state-of-the-art, and the social environment would be perfect for them." Sebastian contributed, warming to the topic. "Many of the residents are former executives and professionals. They have bridge tournaments, wine tastings, cultural lectures." Throughout this discussion, I noticed how naturally they used "we," while occasionally glancing in my direction, with expressions that politely but clearly excluded me from the decision-making process. The message was unmistakable. They were the successful ones who would handle the important choices and financial arrangements. I was expected to contribute whatever modest amount I could manage, and be grateful for their generosity in not expecting more. "Of course, premium care facilities come with premium price tags," Marcus continued, directing this observation specifically toward me. "But Isabella and I have discussed how we can structure the financial arrangements fairly. We want everyone to contribute according to their abilities, Isabella added with false sweetness. Which means we certainly don't expect you to match our contributions, Elena. Whatever amount you can manage will be genuinely appreciated, Marcus clarified, as if granting me a tremendous favor. Even a small monthly contribution would help. I felt my cheeks burning with a mixture of anger and humiliation, not because I couldn't contribute, but because they had so completely dismissed my potential without ever asking about my actual circumstances. Years of assumptions and subtle judgments had created such a complete narrative about my supposed limitations that they couldn't even imagine I might have built something extraordinary on my own terms. You've always had such potential, Elena, my mother sighed, patting my hand with genuine affection. I still don't understand why you never finished that MBA program. You could have been so successful, like Marcus. Different paths work for different people, Mom, I replied quietly, my voice steady despite the frustration building inside me. Not everyone measures success the same way. True. Marcus nodded with exaggerated understanding, but some measures of success are more concrete than others. Financial security, professional stability, the ability to provide for family during crises. These are universal indicators that one's choices have been sound. As the passive-aggressive commentary continued throughout dinner, I maintained my composure while internally debating my next move. Part of me wanted to reveal everything immediately, to witness their expressions when they realized how spectacularly wrong they'd been about my life for all these years. But another part hesitated, wanting to understand the complete extent of their misconceptions before permanently altering our family dynamic. The evening wound down with more of the same, gentle condescension disguised as concern, offers of help that reinforced their perception of my need for rescue, and discussions about my future that assumed I had no real agency in determining it. By the time we cleared the dinner dishes, I had made my decision. Tomorrow's family meeting would be the moment of truth, when they would discover that their supposedly struggling middle child had achieved more financial success than they could have imagined, just not through the conventional channels they respected and understood. The official family meeting commenced precisely at 10 o'clock the following morning in our parents' living room. Marcus had transformed the space into a makeshift boardroom, complete with his laptop connected to a portable projector displaying a meticulously crafted PowerPoint presentation titled Comprehensive Care Solutions, a Strategic Family Approach. Isabella and Sebastian occupied the love seat, coordinated in their business casual attire like they were attending a corporate retreat, while our parents settled into their familiar recliners. I chose the slightly uncomfortable wooden chair in the corner, the least desirable seat, which seemed perfectly appropriate for my assigned role as the family afterthought. I've conducted extensive research on the top-tier care facilities within a reasonable distance, Marcus began, clicking through slides showcasing upscale communities with manicured gardens and elegant architecture. These 4 options meet our criteria for excellent medical care, engaging social programs, and convenient family access. Each facility he presented was progressively more luxurious, with corresponding price points that made my mother's eyes widen. He detailed amenities like gourmet dining programs, cultural enrichment activities, and specialized memory care units for Dad's condition. His final recommendation, clearly his preferred choice, was a newly opened continuing care community featuring independent living apartments that could seamlessly transition to higher levels of support as needed. This would allow Mom and Dad to maintain their autonomy while having immediate access to comprehensive medical support. Quote, he explained with the confidence of someone accustomed to making executive decisions. They would have a spacious 2-bedroom unit with a private garden patio. The community includes walking trails, a fitness center, and even a 9-hole golf course for Dad. It looks absolutely beautiful, Mom murmured, though I noticed the worry in her expression as she glanced at Dad, who was struggling to follow the rapid-fire presentation despite his obvious effort to remain engaged. Naturally, exceptional care requires significant investment, Marcus continued, transitioning to a slide displaying detailed monthly cost breakdowns. The bottom-line figure caused our mother to draw in a sharp breath, her hand instinctively reaching for Dad's arm. This represents the gap between their current retirement income and actual care costs, Marcus explained with the detached professionalism he used in board meetings. This is the financial responsibility we need to address as a family unit. Sebastian, ever the banking professional, leaned forward with his tablet ready. We've calculated an equitable distribution plan based on current income levels and assets. Isabella and I can comfortably manage 35% of the monthly costs. And I can handle 40% through my year-end bonus structure and investment portfolio," Marcus added smoothly. "That leaves 25%, which translates to approximately $1,500 monthly." All eyes turned toward me, with expressions ranging from sympathetic concern to barely concealed doubt. The unspoken question hung heavy in the air. Could I possibly afford to contribute even this relatively modest share to our parents' care? I remained silent, genuinely curious about how they would frame their assumptions about my financial limitations, without directly insulting me. Stephanie cleared her throat delicately, her voice taking on the tone she typically reserved for discussing sensitive charity cases. "Elena, we understand your situation is quite different from ours. If that amount would create genuine hardship, perhaps you could contribute through other means, visiting more frequently to provide personal care assistance, or helping with administrative tasks. We absolutely don't want to create financial stress," Marcus added with the patronizing gentleness he'd perfected over the years. "Perhaps $700 or $800 monthly would be more realistic for your current budget? Isabella and I could adjust our contributions to cover the difference." "How generous of both of you," I remarked quietly, noting how they'd already determined what I could and couldn't afford without ever directly asking about my actual financial situation. "We simply want what's best for Mom and Dad," Isabella said, her voice carrying a hint of defensiveness. "Those of us who are in a position to contribute more should naturally do so. It's about family responsibility." Dad, who had been quietly observing throughout the presentation, suddenly focused directly on me with unexpected sharpness. "Do you even have steady employment right now, Elena? Last time we spoke, you mentioned being between projects." Before I could respond, Marcus jumped in with what he clearly considered a helpful solution. "Actually, I've been meaning to discuss this with you. Goldman has an entry-level analyst position opening in our technology consulting division. The salary would be modest by New York standards, but for someone in Elena's current situation, it would provide stability, benefits, and a clear career trajectory. I could definitely put in a recommendation." "That's incredibly thoughtful," Isabella beamed at our brother before turning to me with bright enthusiasm. "A real position with a prestigious firm would make such a tremendous difference for your future, Elena. Think of the networking opportunities alone." The condescension was becoming almost unbearable. They had constructed such a complete fiction about my supposed professional failures that they couldn't even conceive I might have built something successful using my own vision and determination. Their reality was so fixed that evidence contradicting it simply didn't register. "I appreciate the thought," I said carefully, "but I'm quite satisfied with my current professional arrangements." Marcus and Isabella exchanged one of their knowing looks, the same expression they'd shared since childhood when they believed I was being naive about something obvious. "Being satisfied and being secure are fundamentally different things, Elena," Marcus said with the patience of someone explaining basic concepts to a child. "At some point, you need to think practically about your future. You can't survive on freelance projects and wishful thinking indefinitely." The conversation continued in this vein for another 20 minutes, with my siblings systematically outlining their vision for our parents' care while making increasingly transparent references to my presumed inability to contribute meaningfully. Each comment built upon their shared assumption that I was barely maintaining financial stability, let alone capable of participating as an equal partner in important family decisions. As I listened to their well-intentioned but fundamentally insulting planning session, I found myself calculating exactly how much the care facility Marcus preferred would cost annually. The figure was substantial but represented less than 6 months of my passive investment income. I could fund their entire proposal without touching my primary assets, but they had no framework for understanding that possibility. Finally, as Marcus began outlining backup plans for more affordable care options in case their preferred facility proved too expensive, I made my decision. Tomorrow morning, before we finalized any arrangements, it was time to introduce my family to reality. The next morning arrived crisp and clear, with autumn sunlight streaming through the windows of our parents' living room. Marcus had once again set up his presentation equipment, this time with additional financial spreadsheets and legal documents spread across the coffee table. Isabella and Sebastian sat poised with their matching leather portfolios, while our parents occupied their usual chairs, looking smaller and more fragile in the morning light. I took my assigned seat on the uncomfortable wooden chair, deliberately maintaining my role as the family's financial afterthought for just a little while longer. Before we finalized the care arrangements, Marcus began, opening his laptop with executive efficiency. I want to review the financial commitments one more time. It's crucial that everyone understands their responsibilities and confirms they can meet them consistently. He clicked through several slides showing monthly payment schedules, emergency fund requirements, and long-term cost projections. The numbers were substantial but manageable for people with significant resources, which, according to their calculations, included everyone except me. "Elena," Isabella said gently, "we've adjusted the payment structure to make your contribution more manageable. Instead of the $1,500 we discussed yesterday, we're thinking $600 monthly would be more realistic for your situation. And if even that becomes difficult," Sebastian added diplomatically, "there are always alternative ways to contribute. Personal care visits, administrative assistance, coordinating with medical staff." Their kindness was genuine, but it was also deeply insulting in its assumptions. They were essentially offering me charity while congratulating themselves on their generosity. "Actually," I said, reaching for my phone, "before we make any final decisions, I need to make a quick call to confirm something." "Now isn't really the time for personal calls," Marcus said with growing irritation. "We're in the middle of important family business." I ignored his objection and dialed Carmen's number. "Hi, it's me. Is everything arranged for today?" I paused, listening to her confirmation. "Perfect. Proceed with the arrival in 20 minutes. Yes, the front lawn should be adequate space. Thank you." I ended the call and turned back to my increasingly confused family. "Sorry about that. Just confirming my transportation arrangements." "Did you call another taxi?" Isabella asked. "We're not finished with the meeting yet." "Not exactly a taxi," I replied, settling back into my chair with newfound calm. "Now about those care facilities Marcus researched. I actually have an alternative suggestion." Marcus's expression tightened with barely concealed impatience. "Elena, I've already investigated every quality facility within a 100-mile radius. If there were better options, they would be included in my analysis. This particular facility isn't publicly listed," I continued calmly. "It only accepts residents through private referral from its founding organization. It's called Riverside Memory Care, and it opened 18 months ago about 15 minutes from here. And how exactly would you know about an exclusive, unlisted care facility?" Isabella asked with barely suppressed laughter. "Did you find it on some blog?" I smiled slightly, feeling the moment of truth approaching. "I know about it because I built it. Riverside Memory Care is operated by the Rodriguez Family Foundation, my foundation." A confused silence descended over the room like a heavy blanket. Marcus recovered first, his face cycling through disbelief, confusion, and something approaching anger. "What do you mean, your foundation? You can't possibly be suggesting you have the resources to establish a healthcare facility." "That's exactly what I'm suggesting," I replied evenly. "This is absurd," he scoffed, his corporate composure cracking. "Next you'll tell us you own a fleet of sports cars and a vacation home in Europe." "No European property," I said, with growing amusement. "Though I have been considering something in Costa Rica." "Elena, if this is your idea of humor, it's incredibly inappropriate," Isabella said sharply. "We're trying to have a serious discussion about our parents' future care." "I assure you, I'm being completely serious," I replied. "Right," Marcus laughed with harsh disbelief. "The same sister who can't afford reliable transportation suddenly owns a healthcare foundation. That makes perfect sense." As if responding to a carefully choreographed cue, the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors began cutting through the morning air, growing steadily louder. My family's conversation halted abruptly as the noise became impossible to ignore. "What in the world?" my mother exclaimed, moving toward the window with Sebastian's assistance. Outside, a sleek silver helicopter was descending toward their spacious front lawn, its rotors creating waves in the grass and shaking the branches of the old oak tree. The pilot expertly maneuvered the aircraft to a gentle landing, the engine settling into a steady idle. "Are they allowed to land here?" Isabella asked in alarm. "Should we call the authorities?" I calmly stood and gathered my simple backpack, smoothing down my unremarkable clothes. "No need to call anyone. That's for me." 5 pairs of eyes stared at me in complete bewilderment, their faces reflecting shock, confusion, and dawning realization. "What do you mean for you?" Marcus demanded, his voice tight with disbelief. "What is happening here, Elena?" I walked toward the front door and paused, turning back to face my family one final time, before everything changed forever. "I believe your exact words yesterday were that I couldn't even afford reliable transportation," I said with perfect calm. "You were absolutely right. I don't own a car." I opened the door as the helicopter's engines continued their steady rhythm, the pilot visible in his crisp uniform, giving me a professional wave of recognition. "My ride is here," I announced simply, stepping toward the threshold. "We're going to continue this conversation at my place." The last thing I saw before stepping outside was my mother's face going completely pale before she slowly sank onto the sofa, my father frozen with his mouth agape, Isabella clutching Sebastian's arm so tightly her knuckles turned white, and Marcus looking like someone had just informed him that everything he believed about reality was fundamentally incorrect. As I walked across the lawn toward the waiting helicopter, I could feel their eyes following my every step, their minds struggling to reconcile the Elena they thought they knew, with the woman confidently approaching a private aircraft that had apparently come specifically for her. As the helicopter lifted off with me securely strapped inside, I caught a final glimpse of my family still standing frozen in the doorway, their expressions a mixture of shock, confusion, and something approaching panic. The pilot, David, handed me a noise-canceling headset, and I sank back into the plush leather seat, finally allowing myself to process the magnitude of what had just occurred. "Everything all right, Miss Rodriguez?" David asked through the intercom. "You seem a bit tense." "Just family drama, David," I replied, watching my childhood home shrink below us. "You know how complicated these things can get." "Yes, ma'am. Should I take the scenic route to give them more time to process?" he asked, with a hint of humor in his voice. I laughed, feeling some of the knots in my shoulders begin to loosen. "Tempting, but let's head directly to Willowbrook. We'll be bringing them all back with us shortly, and I think they've had enough surprises for one morning." The helicopter banked smoothly toward the rolling hills outside Millbrook Valley, where my recently purchased estate was nestled among 200 acres of pristine woodland. I had bought the property 8 months ago when I decided to establish a regional headquarters closer to my hometown, partly for business reasons but mostly because I'd begun to miss having roots somewhere beautiful and peaceful. The main house was a restored 19th-century mansion with 12 bedrooms, modern amenities thoughtfully integrated into its historic architecture. The grounds featured formal gardens, a natural lake, stables that I was converting into a conference center, and a newly constructed helipad that had proven quite useful for business meetings with clients who preferred privacy. It was undeniably extravagant, but it was also a long-term investment in creating a space where I could blend my professional success with a more grounded lifestyle. The estate allowed me to host board meetings in the morning and walk barefoot through wildflower meadows in the evening. Below us, Willowbrook Estate came into view, the sprawling stone mansion with its slate roof, carefully landscaped grounds, and the guest cottage where my live-in staff maintained their quarters. It was breathtaking from this aerial perspective, but also somewhat intimidating, which was precisely why I'd hesitated to reveal its existence to my family. How could I explain that despite this outward display of wealth, I still valued simplicity and meaningful work over status symbols? As we settled onto the helipad, I saw Carmen waiting with her tablet and briefcase, ready to provide updates on the day's schedule. She'd been with me since Secure Vault's early days, one of the few people who understood both my professional ambitions and personal values intimately. "How did the grand revelation go?" she asked as I approached, offering me a bottle of sparkling water. "About as dramatically as expected," I replied. Mom nearly fainted, Dad looked stunned, and my siblings appeared to be questioning everything they thought they knew about reality. We'll be bringing them here within the hour, I continued, so please ensure everything is prepared for extended family conversations. Already handled, she assured me confidently. Chef Maria has prepared a beautiful lunch. The East Wing guest suites are ready if anyone decides to stay overnight, and I've assembled the complete family documentation package as you requested. The family package contained comprehensive information about the care arrangements I'd been quietly establishing for my parents over the past 6 months. The foundation that operated Riverside Memory Care, the medical trust fund I'd created to cover all their healthcare needs, and the legal framework ensuring they would receive exceptional care regardless of any future family disagreements or complications. What would I do without you, Carmen? I asked gratefully. Probably acquire another tech company out of sheer boredom, she replied with a grin. Speaking of which, the Singapore team sent over the quarterly security audit results. They need your review by Wednesday. I'll handle it tonight, I promised. Today is about family, complicated as that might be. An hour later, David radioed that he was approaching my parents' house for the return trip. I took several deep breaths, preparing myself for the next phase of this revelation. Part of me regretted the theatrical helicopter entrance. It felt manipulative and possibly cruel. But after years of dismissal and condescension, perhaps a dramatic gesture was exactly what was needed to break through their entrenched perceptions. When the helicopter returned carrying my entire family, their expressions had evolved from shock to something approaching awe, mixed with lingering confusion. My mother clutched her purse like a protective shield, my father gazed out the window with childlike wonder, and my siblings maintained an unprecedented silence that was entirely out of character. Only Sebastian seemed to have recovered somewhat, his banker's training probably already calculating the value of what he was observing. As we landed and everyone disembarked onto the estate's manicured grounds, the full impact of Willowbrook came into view. Isabella's mouth fell open as she took in the mansion's imposing facade, while Marcus kept blinking rapidly, as if trying to wake himself from an elaborate dream. "Welcome to my home," I said simply, leading them toward the main entrance where Carmen waited with her professional smile and perfect posture. "This is actually yours?" my mother finally managed to ask as we entered the soaring foyer with its grand staircase and imported crystal chandelier. "Yes, Mom. I purchased it 8 months ago when I decided to establish a regional office for the East Coast operations," I explained calmly. "Regional office of what exactly?" Marcus demanded, finding his voice at last but struggling to process the opulent surroundings. I led them into the main living room with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gardens and lake beyond. "Secure Vault Technologies," I said, gesturing for them to sit on the custom Italian sofas arranged around a marble coffee table that had been carved from a single stone. "My company." "Your company," Marcus repeated flatly, as if the words didn't make sense in any language. "Since when do you have a company? And how could you possibly afford all of this?" The moment of complete truth had finally arrived, and I felt surprisingly calm as I prepared to shatter their assumptions once and for all. "I founded Secure Vault 8 years ago," I began, my voice steady despite the emotional weight of finally sharing my truth. "We specialize in cybersecurity solutions for small and medium-sized businesses. 4 months ago, Tech Global Corporation acquired us for $42 million. I retained executive leadership of the division and significant equity in the parent company." The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Isabella looked like she might follow our mother's earlier example and lose consciousness, while Marcus had gone completely pale beneath his carefully maintained tan. $42 million? My father repeated slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "My Elena?" "Yes, Dad," I said gently, moving to sit on the ottoman beside his chair. "Your Elena. But you never said anything?" My mother stammered, her hands trembling slightly. "All these years, we thought, we believed." "You thought I was struggling," I finished for her with compassion. "I know, I never corrected that assumption because it seemed easier than dealing with the complications that would follow." "Why would you let us believe you were barely surviving financially?" Isabella demanded, her voice rising with a mixture of hurt and indignation. Do you have any idea how worried we've been about your future? I raised an eyebrow at her, feeling a familiar spark of the old resentment. Were you worried, Isabella? Or was it more comfortable to believe I had failed? You gave me a gift card for job interview clothes yesterday. That wasn't worry. That was confirmation bias. She had the grace to blush deeply. I was genuinely trying to help. No, I said firmly but not unkindly. You were trying to reinforce a narrative that made sense to you, that the sister who chose an unconventional path must inevitably be struggling. It never occurred to any of you that I might succeed brilliantly on my own terms. You could have told us, Marcus said, his voice carrying an edge of anger that surprised me. Instead, you let us make complete fools of ourselves. I didn't create your assumptions, I replied evenly. You constructed those all on your own. Every time I tried to discuss my work in detail, you changed the subject or dismissed it as that computer thing Elena does. You never asked genuine questions about my business or my life. But the old clothes, the commercial flights, the taxi from the airport, my mother began, her voice confused and hurt, were deliberate choices. I finished. I live simply by preference, not necessity. I drive a 10-year-old Honda when I'm in the city because I genuinely prefer it to flashy cars. I took a taxi yesterday because I flew commercial to maintain privacy a bit longer. None of that indicates financial struggle. It reflects my personal values. Sebastian, ever practical, spoke up for the first time since entering my home. So this care facility you mentioned, Riverside Memory Care, that's genuinely yours? I nodded and gestured to Carmen, who approached with the comprehensive family portfolio I'd prepared months ago. Yes, after SecureVault's Series B funding round 3 years ago, I established the Rodriguez Family Foundation. It operates Riverside Memory Care, which specializes in innovative dementia support and holistic elder care using cutting-edge therapeutic approaches. I opened the portfolio and began showing them the documentation, the medical trust established in our parents' names, the comprehensive healthcare provisions, the legal framework that would ensure they received exceptional care regardless of how family dynamics evolved over time. You arranged all of this without consulting us? Marcus asked, his voice a complex mixture of awe and residual anger. I arranged all of this because I love them, I corrected gently. And yes, without consulting you, because I knew exactly what would happen. You would question my decisions, attempt to take control of the process, and ultimately require me to prove myself worthy of having input in our parents' care. Today's meeting confirmed that prediction perfectly. Isabella was staring at the legal documents with growing understanding. The trust fund. Elena, this covers everything. Medical care, living expenses, recreational activities. There's even an education fund for potential grandchildren. And emergency provisions for experimental treatments not covered by insurance, I added. Plus a comfortable stipend so they never have to worry about money for the rest of their lives. My mother wiped away tears that had begun flowing freely. We never intended to make you feel excluded or dismissed, Elena. Perhaps not intentionally, I acknowledged. But every gift card for basic necessities, every offer of entry-level employment, every patronizing comment about my potential, sent a clear message that you believed I had failed and needed rescue from my poor choices. We thought we were being supportive, Isabella insisted, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. Were you supporting me, or were you validating your own life choices by casting mine as the cautionary tale? I asked directly. The family member who couldn't succeed without following your prescribed path? My words hung in the air like a challenge, uncomfortable but undeniably accurate. For the first time in years, my siblings seemed to be genuinely examining their behavior, rather than automatically defending it. My father, despite his condition, reached over and took my hand with surprising strength, his eyes clearer than they'd been all weekend. I always knew you were special, Elena. Different from your siblings, yes, but special in your own way. I just didn't understand what you were building all these years. Thank you, Dad, I said softly, squeezing his hand. That means everything to me. Carmen discreetly appeared in the doorway, signaling that lunch was prepared. I invited everyone to move to the dining room, where floor-to-ceiling windows provided spectacular views of the lake and surrounding forest. As we settled around the mahogany table set with fine china and fresh flowers from the garden, the initial shock began giving way to genuine curiosity. For the first time in years, they were truly seeing me, not as the failing middle child who needed guidance and financial assistance, but as a successful entrepreneur who had built something significant using her own vision and determination. The helicopter had certainly captured their attention, but this moment of authentic interest in my actual life felt like the real revelation. The conversation that followed was unlike any we'd shared as adults, marked by genuine questions rather than polite assumptions, real curiosity instead of patronizing concern, and the beginning of what might eventually become mutual respect. After lunch, I offered to give my family a complete tour of the Willowbrook estate. The property included the main mansion, 2 guest cottages, and a newly constructed office complex where my East Coast team would soon be working on regional expansion projects. As we walked the carefully maintained grounds, the initial shock gradually dissolved into a more complex mixture of emotions: lingering embarrassment from my siblings, obvious pride from my parents, and my own profound sense of relief at finally being authentic with the people who had known me longest. In the garden pavilion overlooking the lake, we settled onto comfortable outdoor furniture for coffee and continued conversation. The questions came more naturally now, with genuine curiosity replacing the judgment and assumptions that had characterized our interactions for years. "When did you know Secure Vault would become this successful?" my father asked, his eyes more focused and present than they'd been all weekend. Despite his Parkinson's progression, his interest in my work seemed to anchor him in the current moment. "There wasn't a single eureka moment," I explained honestly. "We nearly went bankrupt twice in the first 3 years. I lived in a studio apartment with a leaking ceiling and survived on instant noodles and determination. But in year 4, we developed a security protocol that revolutionized how small businesses protect customer data. That's when everything changed." "Why didn't you ask for help during those difficult times?" my mother wondered, her voice filled with genuine regret. "We would have supported you if we'd known how serious you were." "With conditions," I said gently but truthfully. Every offer of help came with the expectation that I would first admit my path was a mistake and consider more traditional alternatives. I needed to prove to myself that entrepreneurship could work before I could prove it to anyone else. Marcus, who had been uncharacteristically quiet throughout our garden conversation, finally spoke up with something I'd never heard from him before: genuine humility. "I owe you a sincere apology, Elena. I made assumptions about your choices that said far more about my own insecurities than your actual capabilities." The admission startled me. My brother rarely acknowledged being wrong about anything, let alone offered unprompted apologies. "What insecurities?" I asked, genuinely curious. He sighed deeply, setting down his coffee cup and staring out over the peaceful lake. "I followed every rule of conventional success: Ivy League education, prestigious corporate position, country club membership, house in the right neighborhood. I did everything exactly right according to our family's definition of achievement." He paused, his usual confidence notably absent. "And I'm genuinely miserable at least half the time. I hate my daily routine, I resent most of my colleagues, and I feel trapped by the lifestyle I've built around other people's expectations." "Marcus," my mother exclaimed, "you've never mentioned feeling unhappy." "Because admitting dissatisfaction would mean acknowledging I might have chosen incorrectly," he explained with painful honesty. "So when Elena chose a completely different path, I unconsciously needed her to fail in order to validate my own decisions. Her success challenges the entire narrative I've built my identity around." His vulnerability created space for Isabella, who had been fidgeting with her wedding rings throughout his confession. "I understand that feeling completely," she admitted quietly. "My life looks absolutely perfect on social media. The charity events, the designer clothes, the exotic vacations. But Sebastian and I have been in marriage counseling for the past year because everything feels increasingly hollow and performative." Sebastian nodded in agreement, taking her hand supportively. "We've been reevaluating what actually brings us joy versus what simply maintains our social image. The big house and exclusive memberships came with emotional costs we never anticipated." This unexpected vulnerability from my siblings was deeply moving. For years, I had imagined them as completely content with their conventional success. judging me from positions of smug superiority. The reality that they too harbored doubts and regrets created entirely new possibilities for authentic connection. "Why did you keep your success secret for so long?" my father asked with characteristic directness. "Were you punishing us for not believing in your dreams?" The question stung because it contained more truth than I wanted to acknowledge. Part of me had definitely enjoyed the fantasy of a dramatic revelation that would force them to recognize how spectacularly wrong they'd been about my potential. Initially, I kept quiet because I wasn't certain the success would be sustainable, I admitted. Later, it became a protective habit. And yes, maybe there was an element of wanting to prove everyone wrong in the most dramatic way possible. That was petty of me, and I regret the deception now. "The helicopter entrance was definitely extra," Isabella said with a small smile, using her favorite expression for anything over the top. I laughed, acknowledging the accuracy of her observation. "Not my most mature moment," I conceded. But after Marcus's comment about not affording reliable transportation, something inside me just snapped. I deserved that reality check. He admitted, though Mom fainting was genuinely concerning. I was completely overwhelmed. Our mother defended herself. "Discovering your daughter is a millionaire tends to come as quite a shock." "Multi-millionaire," Sebastian corrected automatically, then looked embarrassed when everyone turned to stare at him. "Sorry, occupational habit." The conversation naturally shifted to our parents' care, but this time with me, fully included as an equal partner in the decision-making process. I explained Riverside's innovative approach to memory care, particularly for progressive conditions like Dad's Parkinson's. Rather than the institutional model Marcus had researched, Riverside offered small, home-like residences with completely personalized care plans, and an emphasis on preserving dignity and independence for as long as possible. The foundation has already established a comprehensive trust to cover all expenses indefinitely, I explained, addressing the financial concerns that had dominated yesterday's meeting. But this isn't about me taking control of every decision. It's about all of us working together as equals to find the best possible solution. "Equals," Marcus repeated thoughtfully. "That's going to require some significant adjustment in my thinking." "Mine too," I acknowledged. "I've been defining myself in opposition to all of you for so long, I'm honestly not sure I know how to just be a sister and daughter without that underlying edge of resentment." As the afternoon progressed, we began the delicate process of rebuilding our family dynamic on this new foundation of honesty and mutual respect. The process was awkward at times, with old patterns of interaction reasserting themselves before being consciously corrected, but the willingness to change was evident from everyone involved. When evening approached, I invited everyone to stay overnight in the guest cottages, an offer they accepted with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Isabella was clearly excited about experiencing the luxury accommodations, while Marcus seemed relieved not to have to process everything while driving back to the city. My parents were simply happy to have all their adult children under one roof, something that hadn't happened in over 2 years. Over dinner prepared by Chef Maria, we continued building bridges across the chasm of misunderstanding that had separated us for nearly a decade. There were difficult moments, Isabella's hurt over being excluded from my real life, Marcus's lingering defensiveness about his career dissatisfaction, my parents' regret at not supporting my entrepreneurial vision more enthusiastically. But there were also moments of genuine laughter and connection, as we shared stories from our separate lives, with newfound openness. "You really flew to Singapore for a single day just to sign contracts?" Isabella asked incredulously. "I can't imagine having that kind of freedom and flexibility." "It wasn't as glamorous as it sounds," I assured her. I was so jet-lagged I accidentally put salt in my coffee and nearly dozed off during the presentation. "Still," she sighed wistfully, "your life sounds genuinely exciting and meaningful." "Parts of it are," I acknowledged honestly. "Other parts can be isolating and stressful. Success creates incredible opportunities, but it also brings unexpected challenges. There are significant trade-offs with every choice we make." "I think that's what I'm finally beginning to understand," Marcus said thoughtfully. "There's no perfect path that guarantees happiness or fulfillment. We all just navigate as best we can, with the choices available to us. As we finished dinner and moved to the living room for dessert and continued conversation, I realized something fundamental had shifted in our family's dynamic. The rigid hierarchies and unspoken judgments that had defined our relationships for so long weren't completely gone, but they had been meaningfully disrupted. In their place was something tentative, but genuinely promising, a more authentic connection based on who we actually were rather than the roles we'd been performing for each other. When my mother accidentally knocked over her water glass, staining the expensive Persian rug, her immediate distress revealed how much she still felt like a visitor in my world, rather than family. "I'm so sorry," she gasped. "That rug probably costs more than our monthly mortgage." "It's just a rug, Mom," I said gently, helping her clean up the small spill. "Material things can be replaced." This conversation, this honest connection we're finally building, that's what truly matters. Later that evening, as everyone settled into their guest accommodations, I stood on the master suite's private balcony, looking out at moonlight, reflecting on the calm lake surface. Marcus joined me, offering a glass of wine from my collection. "You've accomplished something remarkable, little sister," he said with genuine admiration. "Not just the financial success and all this luxury, but building something meaningful entirely on your own terms. That requires a kind of courage I'm not sure I possess." "It's never too late to make changes," I told him sincerely. "If you're miserable 60% of the time, those aren't terrible odds, but you could definitely aim higher for yourself." He laughed softly, the sound more relaxed than I'd heard from him in years. "Always the optimist, Elena. Some things never change." "Some things shouldn't," I agreed, touching my glass gently against his in a quiet toast to new possibilities and second chances. As I settled into bed that night, in the home I'd built but never shared with my family until today, I felt lighter than I had in years. Our complicated family dynamics weren't magically resolved. There would undoubtedly be setbacks and old patterns trying to reassert themselves in the months ahead. But a fundamental shift had occurred, creating genuine space for authentic relationships based on who we really were, rather than who we'd pretended to be. True wealth, I realized as sleep approached, wasn't measured in helicopter rides or estate properties, but in relationships where you could be completely yourself and still be unconditionally loved. That was the real victory, far more meaningful than proving anyone wrong.